So, by way of introduction, David Stafford, really happy to be here. It is my second time presenting at a BriForum. Sadly, I haven't been able to make all 13 of them. I think this is my fourth BriForum that I've gotten to be an attendee. I was super excited because last year, we were talking a little bit about the FUIT stories. Go out and watch the Chicago session. It was a great session, had a lot of fun, and got some really good feedback from folks. Last year we talked a lot about FUIT. I would have loved to have been in London last year, but something really cool conflicted. This is Trent. Trent was born 2 days after BriForum London, and I tried to work it out with my wife so that I could attend BriForum, and I told her that it's only an 8-hour flight, and there's flights about every 4 hours, and I could get home in time. She wasn't having it. So the reason I missed it last year was because of this little guy. He's doing great now, and so I don't need to be there right this moment. Bay City, Michigan. This is where David Stafford started. By a quick. Anybody ever heard of Bay City, Michigan? Anybody ever heard of? We got one guy. Anybody ever heard of Michigan? Boom! Michigan, absolutely right. So hometown, right? Home of the fireworks. This is actually where I grew up, literally. So I grew up in between a forest and a cornfield, and that's the birthplace of technology innovation. Our downtown, the big popcorn bucket, is a planetarium, and the hot restaurant in my hometown is Mr. Hot Dog. Mr. Hot Dog. That's where everybody goes to chow down. And so for $1.39, you can get all the hot dogs that you can possibly eat. I know a lot of people look at me and they think that I'm right around 19 years of age, and so what I wanted to let everybody know is kind of what I was doing when I was 19. I was graduating from Western High School, and I got this really cool job at a chemical company called Dow Corning. Dow Corning is really famous. They made a product that was typically sold in pairs. Silicone, if anybody can catch my drift. Had a great time working there. That's me literally at 19, getting my start in career. And I will tell you, even though I am now technically a vendor wonk, in the fact that I work for a vendor today, I have spent way more time under desks than I have up in front of groups trying to pitch or sell product. And so that's kind of how I got my start. Then, as you heard, I worked for a really great company called Cisco. No, not that one, where I got to go from my home state of Michigan, went all the way out to San Jose, California, because they told me it wasn't that expensive. As you can tell, I found out it really was that expensive, and so I made my way back to the relative lap of luxury of North Carolina, where I now reside with my family and actually have a bit of space to have a house and park my car and other luxuries that I couldn't have had if I would have stayed out there. Going from Dow Corning, this is like my favorite line from Social Network. Dow Corning, I was in charge of 10,000 desktops. And I thought I was pretty hot shit, right? Except that, what's really cool is going from 10,000 to 100,000. And that was what I ended up managing for Cisco. And what I kept learning along the way is there were certain things that I felt my career was going so well, where everything to me was just becoming to be a point of scale. Because what I found is that the way that I managed 10,000 and the way that I managed 100,000, it really wasn't all that different. It was just a matter of scale. I put in more servers, more load balancers, and all the things that I had learned were pretty much the same. And I used to have all of these theories about project managers and IT managers that basically my feeling is that once you lost your technical edge, you went into management. When you could no longer keep up and stay on top of the new technologies and the rate of change that was coming in, that's when you basically just had to fold and get out. And that was always something that really bothered me. I really, really wanted to stay in the fray of technology, and I wanted to make sure that I was always on the bleeding edge instead of being too far down on the receiving end. So the line that my boss gave me was lead or wish you had. And so instead of just being a customer, I decided to shift and I jumped over to a vendor. And if anybody ever got to see the View 5 launch video, that would be me on top of the rental car. Little footnote, if you ever return a car to Avis with footprints all over the roof, dents, and a broken windshield, that loss damage waiver is a really, really good thing to have. Needless to say, we didn't actually have to pay for the damage done to the car in the filming of the video. So this is what I'm all about, is end user computing, and I absolutely love this technology. I absolutely love this space. There is nothing more I like than end user computing. I'm not a server guy. That's, working at VMware, I always end up following the server guys and talking to storage admins. I remember Brian a year or so ago talking about how much he loved VDI. We had a chance to get to meet some of the other speakers last night, and one of the guys mentioned that his private hobby pastime is he's actually into breeding horses. Not exactly something I would have ever guessed that people did in their spare time. So in the spirit of our fellow speaker that breeds horses, I just want to say that is me, and that is end user computing. I absolutely love end user computing. There is just nothing more enjoyable than end user computing for me. So let's dive in then into some of the problems that we're facing from the world of an IT professional. And what I've decided to do here is I didn't want this just to be all about me and my personal experiences. And so I floated out a survey, and I got a really tremendous response from friends on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter. All these people came and actually provided a lot of information around how they've managed some of these IT turns and shifts and how they were able to stay current. And so what got me going on this was Jack's article. How many of you does anybody remember this article? Read this one? If you haven't, one of my favorite ones of the year. Anything that has FUIT in it, I'm naturally attracted to. But what Jack pointed out was real simple. He said there was a time where corporate technologies so far exceeded consumer technologies that people were actually getting a better technology experience in the enterprise space. And that was great. But then when corporate IT failed to keep up, that gap is what created the FUIT scenario, where because they were getting such a better experience in their personal lives than they were getting at work, that gap required somebody to come and fill, and that was where basically they took it into their own hands to deliver the technology that they need. Now, when that gap is very small, where all the capabilities that they are used to in a personal life apply to their professional life, no problem, everybody's happy. But where things get out of whack is when the corporate environment has that lack of capabilities that people are used to. So I started to take a look at that and say, okay, this was exactly what happened to me, right? There was never any way that I could, working in a technology company that was inventing this new world of IT, there was no way that I could ever stay ahead. All I could do is try and keep up and be able to stay current. So, I floated the survey out there. I got right around 25 responses, which wasn't too bad, from 4 different continents, so this isn't just a US-centric thing. And it also spans 4 decades of IT. There were people talking about what IT meant back in the 80s for them. And so what I want to quickly run through is basically what I called 20 and 20. And I want to give you a real quick flyby of what's happened and what are some of the changes and trends that we've seen. Because when we start to look at all these things that have happened, we start to be able to see some real clear direction in terms of what's going to happen next. Because you can actually just play it out and it makes logical sense. One of the things that I asked people to tell me about was this gap. And just like what Jack was talking about, where the capabilities that the enterprise was providing When that was exceeding what the users could do, everything was good. But as that gap narrowed, that's what started to give rise of FUIT. And what we talked about in the survey was to try and get a handle on what people felt their proficiency was around using information technology. Back in the day, there was enough of a gap that people respected IT. People actually liked coming and getting help from the IT guy because they were helping show them how to use technology that they didn't know how to use. They were equipping them to do things that they didn't even know was possible. That's not our lives anymore, right? We're not quite in the business of user delight. We're now in this business of just trying to manage the compliance and the risk, and we're becoming more of the bad guy than the good guy. This was actually the chasm of respect. The chasm of respect was when what IT could do was better than what they could do on their own, and that drove a level of respect from our users that we just don't enjoy anymore. So this is where I said we'll move fairly quickly through this, but it sets the stage because you start to see the pendulum swing back and forth. It all began back in the day of how do I use this foot pedal, and we were literally taking people off of 3270 terminals, giving them Windows, and teaching them how to use a GUI and a point-and-click interface. Tiger screens. I remember Judy Webb. I took her off of Tiger Screen and gave her a PC. She had no clue what to do. In the meanwhile, the IT skills that were required to manage in this world, hardware and installing Windows. When is the last time anybody here has needed to resolve an IRQ conflict? How many people remember resolving IRQ conflicts? Exactly right. That was our life. That was our core skill. That is what made Dave Stafford, circa 1995, employable in the industry, was because I knew how to solve an IRQ conflict, and I could install Windows. Then Windows 95 came out, and the users suddenly went from being computer illiterates in a short period. I'm online, baby. I'm surfing the web. I've got America Online, at least that was our world of the internet. So while the users are off trying to do that, we are starting to get ahead of the curve. And we start learning about things like NT security. We start learning about ACLs and file permissions and how to do automated deployments, because what we quickly learned is we're not going to be able to manage an environment running desk to desk with floppy disks and CDs installing Windows. We start to learn how to centralize all of that work. True story, in my interview at Cisco, I was asked what my number one IT skill was. My answer was automated deployment of operating systems and applications. And the guy said, really? Have you ever read the book, The Automated Deployment and Customization of Windows NT? And I'm like, no, can't say I have. Which is the second worst response I could have given to, yeah, I read it and it sucked, because the guy that was interviewing me was actually Richard Puckett, the author of Windows NT Automated Deployments and Customization. Richard and I got to be good friends. You'll see I mentioned it back to him here in a few slides. So great, now everybody's equipped. We've got the online capabilities, we've got the Windows, and so the next thing that people said is, if you get me a laptop, I promise I will work from home. Get me a laptop. Remember the craze of everybody suddenly needing a laptop back in the easy days of you had a desktop at work and a desktop at home, and maybe that linked it up. Well, if you're connecting all the people at home, on the IT side, what we had to learn how to do is avoid Windows 98, because that was going to be a disaster. That was effectively the Vista of its day. And we started to look at how are we going to deploy applications in a way that is more centrally manageable. And how do we take away some of those issues? And so for me, I had Windows 98 workstations, and SAP GUI was what put me over the edge. SAP GUI was the app that exhausted the GDI heap of Wintendo. And if the GDI heap was gone, then you could only have 2 or 3 SAP sessions, and we were hurting the business. And so I got thrown into the fire to deploy WinFrame in order to be able to get people up and running on SAP GUI. So now people are online and getting comfortable with that. The next thing that I would challenge people is, when we think about our users, think about the technical proficiency. All the way back for the last decade, our end users have understood the concepts of NAT gateways. We've taken users from not having the first clue about how to use a computer to asking us how to configure port forwarding on the home routers. So you can see the user proficiency trending upwards. And now that people can get all of their computers online at home and VPN in back into our enterprise, guess what that brings rise to? You know, the need to start to manage and provide remote access and security. How do we start to do that now in a more modern infrastructure? And so now we get into Active Directory, LDAP, and once again, managing Active Directory. That's the first book I ever got an acknowledgement in, once again by Richard Puckett. So technology's shifting, everybody's got a laptop, Windows XP is all around, and people start VPNing in. VPN in's coming from everywhere. What was the problem with all of these devices that were VPNing in? Now we get to the point where we're starting to need to patch. New updates are available. People are constantly being asked to reboot their machines. What did we do as IT, right? In the name of security, I'm going to reboot your machine right now in the middle of whatever you're doing. That was effectively how the patch management systems were almost wired back then. And we were nice. We started to give them countdown timers. Save your work. I'm going to reboot your machine in 4 minutes. And we then leave them out stranded for 15 minutes. And that created effectively this you annoy me IT level where IT is now starting to be a true burden on the users, but we're just trying to secure our environment. Because what happened in 2004? Who remembers that screen? Anybody? What is this representative of? Oh man, I was going to send this to you for Geek Out. This would be my quiz question. I'm sorry, what was it? Blaster? So actually, there were two at the same time. It was Blaster. The one that I was, it was My Doom was the precursor to Blaster. And so what did we do? We went and ran, and this was this is actually the coolest WMI script I ever wrote. I got to learn about in WMI there's associators of, and so I was actually able to look for the My Doom DLL and find the name of the randomly named exe so that I could terminate the right process because it was a random exe, and so you could back it off. And so the Department of Energy actually jumped on and published that script out for people as kind of like an open source tool for My Doom cleaning, and that was the peak of my technical prowess in programming. Never again. So Windows, okay, we finally started to get a handle around Windows, and now the mobility pieces start to come in. And next thing you know is you get people in BlackBerry prayer. And we've all seen it. I might see one or two this very moment. You see the heads nodding down, and people are out there. This is also the year that Cyber Monday was invented, or the term Cyber Monday. Does anybody remember the origin of Cyber Monday? So Cyber Monday is the Monday following the start of the Christmas shopping season. So Black Friday was the start of the shopping season. Cyber Monday was because online and e-commerce came of age, and people had faster internet access at work than they did at home. And so while they had the whole weekend to go off and do their shopping, Cyber Monday represented getting back to work so that you could run out and use your company's internet connection to be able to go and start doing all your online shopping. And so there's a reference to the New York Times article on the origin of Cyber Monday. So as IT people, we start deploying BES servers to help deploy the mobility aspect, and then we start putting in content filtering so that people don't dare go out and do any shopping on this corporate internet connection for fear of bandwidth. And so IT has now drifted further and further into the policeman. We are now completely to the point of no return where IT is not getting any respect. We're nothing more than a hindrance. I'll take it. No, it's all good. I'd be happy to help. So this is all fun and grand. Now, 2007, iPhones come out. Everybody wants a new phone. Oh, and by the way, not only do I want an iPhone because I like that better, I deployed on-premise web conferencing. Anybody deploy Placeware or Meeting Place by Latitude communications? Yes? Yes? I see a few heads nodding. So this was great. I deployed an IT solution for web conferencing. Enterprise web conferencing sounds like a great thing. And every month I would show my management the port usage and the minute usage going up and up and up. And I kept getting more funding because they wanted the ability to record their meetings. They wanted the ability to do external collaboration meetings with customers and partners. And that was all really, really cool. And all of a sudden, literally, I had a flatline month in port usage, followed by a decline in port usage, followed by a serious decline in port usage. 3 months' time, all of a sudden, my web conferencing solution was being abandoned. And so I figured out one of the top users that was using it before, that was no longer using it. I thought they got fired or quit, but was still an employee, so I called him up and asked, why aren't you using Meeting Place anymore? You know, we provide the service. He's like, yeah. He said, no, they finally got me an account on the ciscosales.webex.com environment. Now, ciscosales.webex.com, Cisco didn't own WebEx at the time. WebEx was web-based meeting conferencing. This was the rise of SaaS. Every single account on ciscosales.webex.com was charged to an American Express corporate card. Was not brought in through IT. It was not done with our knowledge, approval, security, blessing, etc. It was just simply, it's better, it's faster, it's cheaper, it works all the time. You are chasing port usage and trying to keep the recording servers up, and I can just buy this for 20 bucks a month. 20 bucks a month. You know, who would dream of declining such an expense for your most critical sales employees? So, well, that is happening beneath our feet. IT is taking a whole different approach, which is, hey, never mind Vista, because I need an evaluation iPhone. Did anybody use that excuse? Right? I need to evaluate the security posture of an iPhone, and so yeah, I need to buy one of those because I think users are going to use it. And I don't even have time to do SaaS application analysis and figure out what we're going to do. And not only do I want an iPhone, but now that I got an iPhone, and I'd like a Mac, and I'd like an iPad, and IT comes racing back, we know how to do this. And as we've heard a dozen times before, look, Mom, you know, it's VDI. You know, we can do Windows on that iPad. See, it is a corporate device. So this is the end. This was the end of IT having any relevance, and that was effectively then when we were just told, F you, IT. And they were done with us. I felt like our relevance had slipped away, and what were we being challenged with? During all this time where we were sitting there constantly just trying to keep pace, well, look at all the new technologies that are out there, right? You've got SAML authentication, you've got OAuth, you've got MDM, MAM, MIM, consumerization of IT, and, you know, effectively what happened. Because these were all of the trends that were starting to come in place that we now need to reskill and start to be able to switch over to. So, effectively, this is the scenario of how we got to where we are as we plot that timeline back out across the decade and see how it managed to come all the way from where we were once relevant to where now we're nothing more than in the way of our users. There was a drink over here. Just start to cough. So, if this has been happening, what does that mean for our careers? Because at the end of the day, like, as much as I love end user computing and I really have a blast doing it, I need to make sure that what I'm doing with my career is staying relevant enough that people keep wanting to pay me to do this when, if you ask my end users what their value of IT is, my end users are starting to get closer and closer to zero. So how am I going to come back and start to be able to prove relevance and value? So here's a few of the ways that you need to recognize when your IT career might be in trouble and in need of a freshening. When you wake up and suddenly realize that Bill Gates didn't actually sign your MCSE certificate, that is the wake-up call. I wept for days in my pillow when I realized that he didn't actually take the time to sign that himself. Here are just 4 simple ways that I encourage you to take a look. The first is, take a look at the role that you want or the one that you just came from, and take a look at how it's either being backfilled or not backfilled. Because if it's not being backfilled, effectively it's like the cliff is falling off right behind you, and you're just running as fast as you can so that you don't get caught up in it. Or take a look at where things are going. I'm talking with customers all the time now around what they need to do to modernize the multi-device workspace and all the other buzzwords and lingo we use to promote technology products. And when we're doing that, it's almost becoming irrelevant, because I'm talking to customers day in and day out that have just said, we're just getting out of the business. This is just a services contract for us now. Doesn't matter how great your product is, it's not even my choice to decide what technology to use. We've outsourced this to insert favorite services vendor here to provide that capability for us. Now, the second one, this is a shout out to my wife and her team, because I'm sure they'll be watching the video a year from now. Hey guys, it's 2014. The terms legacy, sustaining, or optimization, when that starts to creep into job titles, my wife belonged to a team, and the team name was Services and Optimization. That was the name of the team, Services and Optimization. Didn't sound too bad, until by virtue of the work that they were doing, a year later, it was Support and Operations was the name of the team. Guess how strategic that team was in terms of the organization. When what was billed as Services and Optimization, everyone just naturally thought that S&O meant legacy, sustaining, operational work. The next thing, suddenly you're not building solutions, you're writing statements of work. You've all probably already had your hand at doing 1 or 2 of those for different projects, where instead of actually being able to get in and solve the problem, you're just writing the contract. All right, milestone payment at 3 months, 6 months, T&E, covered, not covered. You become experts at contracts instead of actually doing the real work. And then the other one is when executives in the business talk about the problem of shadow IT. We're familiar with the term shadow IT, right? The people doing IT work that aren't actually the IT professionals, they're just the ones in the business that do IT because they like doing it. This one is really dangerous because it's a passive-aggressive behavior. In front of the company, I had a CIO that said, we are going to stamp out shadow IT wherever it is. It's killing us in efficiency. It's killing us in terms of redundancy. Shadow IT must go. And then we stand up and we talk about how great our website MacWiki was. MacWiki was a media wiki that was run on a server under a desk where people basically taught how to get your Mac up and running to work with all the IT systems. They published the group secret for the IPsec VPN so that you could type that in and get your VPN client working. They talked about how to, get software from file shares where somebody downloaded it and posted it off so that it didn't come out of the corporate repository. Shadow IT, when its front billing is we're going to get rid of it, but then people are celebrating, hey, we've got community support for IT now that provides all of this. Really, really interesting dilemma. And that was really the start of where I felt I needed to exit. I'm sorry. No, you could. So that was where I knew that things were in trouble. So where do we need to invest? What are some of the things that are so pivotal to going forward? And this is where we can go back and we can draw now on how we've gotten into the mess that we're in today and try and get a better handle on what the opportunity is. So one of the survey questions I pose to people is, where do you go to get technical information? Where do you go to learn what's current and what's trending and what's hot? Where did you go and where do you go now? My very, very first day at Dow Corning, my very first project was to unbox Microsoft Office 4.2, right? Contained PowerPoint 4.0, Excel 5.0, Word 6.0. came on 25 floppy diskettes, and it came with 3 really thick manuals. And my job was to take the disks out, right? Because that was how we were going to do software compliance, is I wasn't going to give the disks away. Those were out on a file share. And my job as a punk was to take and put the manuals in strategic locations all over the company so that if you needed to know how to use Excel, you could go down to the nearest break room, the nearest printer, and check out a copy of Excel 5.0 manuals. That was my first day on the job. Then we started to turn to expert books because you can't trust the vendors. The vendors they're just going to tell you how things are supposed to work. But if you go to an independent source, they're going to really dig in and get deep and tell you, don't use this, it's not scalable. Do this because it's how to work. When it came time for me to figure out how to deploy SAP GUI, I bought this book to learn how to use terminal services in order to deploy SAP GUI as a starting point. Never imagining that one day I would actually get to meet the author. Did anyone ever have a TechNet CD subscription? You remember these? Man, it was a happy day. It was the happy day of the month when the new CDs came, wasn't it?
When it used to fit in one of those before it became this little warehouse.
Yes. Oh, I love TechNet CD Day, right? Because when the CDs came, I would drop the CD in the drive, and automatically what I would do is I would read all of the new articles that came out that month, because there was actually, they highlighted the new articles for you. And I would literally just read every single KB article so that if that problem ever arose, it would trigger in my mind that, hey, there was an article on...
KB article? No. Q article.
Oh, thank you. It was pre-KB. It was pre-bait. It was Q. Excellent. Another good geek out question. So that was how I felt like I was staying current, because every month they were sending me CDs with all the latest information, and that was a good gig. Then it went to online KBs. They were Qs, I think, at the beginning until they normalized to KB, and now those CDs kind of became much less relevant, right? The only reason that you bought a TechNet subscription was to have TechNet Plus so that you could get the betas, so that you could kick the tires on the new stuff. So online KBs, that was, all right, finally we've got this to where now we're getting real-time information. But whenever you'd go and you'd Yahoo or AltaVista search your technical issue, you would type it in, and all the really good answers were behind a paywall. Anybody remember things like Experts Exchange? Right? You would type in the question and it would say, we've got the answer for you for $20 a month. We'd be happy to share that information with you. And so you started to create these closed communities of expert advice. And finally, over time, that's now just become an open community where people can just openly exchange real information. Now, at 10 o'clock last night, at a bar in London, this became a really hotly debated topic. There are 2 camps when it comes to vendor support, something I didn't even put up here. People seem willing and happy to pay $40,000, $50,000, $100,000 a year to companies like Microsoft for premier support, so that you can open a case and talk to an engineer to resolve an issue. In my experience, there are 2 types of people that open these cases. One is the person that has already exhausted every possible means to fixing it on their own. They have already gone to the knowledge base articles. They've already read all the community forums. They've already read all the blogs that have been written about the problem. They think they know what the problem is. They think that there could be a fix. The only way you're going to get it is because it's either a private tree hot fix that isn't publicly available, or it's going to require developer level because you're dealing with a product that is so new, so big, your enterprise is so unique, there's no trace of evidence out there, and you go and you open the case. Then there's the people that basically see an error message, go, oh my God, call the vendor and read them the error code. 0 by 000 IRQL not equal to. What's my problem? And I've worked with both types of people. And I had management, I remember this comment, his comment was, I don't need a Quincy to tell me why my server's dead. For those that aren't remembering Quincy, he was the medical examiner drama. But I don't want someone to tell me why my server's dead. I just want the server back up and running. That was the manager's attitude. I don't want my person wasting time trying to fix the problem. Get Microsoft on the phone and get that server back up right away. And the other school of thought was that you actually paid these people a lot of money to have a set of knowledge that they could draw upon so that they could solve these problems without it. So in my team, it was always effectively, if you couldn't get Microsoft to count a case as non-decrement, then you failed to do your homework. That was the attitude. Because if it was not in a public knowledge base article, if it was a newly discovered issue, or if it required a private patch, those were non-decrement incidents. And so if anybody on my team ever counted an incident, we kind of just, they had to buy lunch effectively, because that meant that they weren't doing the homework. The other team, 112 cases per quarter or something like that whenever we do the review. Every single issue, they would just go straight, call Microsoft, and get that sorted out. So now we have all these new ways of bringing knowledge. The other thing that we used to have as one of our core IT skills was managing operating systems and image management, right? Went from those floppy disks to a CD in 95, and this one's important, ghosting and ghost casting in 2000, because it wasn't until Windows 98 that sysprep came out and imaging was a supported way of deploying an operating system. If you tried to ghost Windows 95, we all know it worked, but it was officially unsupported because there was no officially supported clone technique. Now this is interesting because I meant to put this just in like big bold letters. Centralize complexity, distribute simplicity. If I could ask every single person on the way out, if you can take away one thing from today's session, centralize complexity, distribute simplicity. We went from distributed complexity, one of the first things we started to do was centralize image management through ghost casting and having a central image that we could deploy. That was really great. Now we took it even up another step and we started to get into zero touch. Tools like the OS Deployment Toolkit started to come of age, and that was really important. And suddenly a new paradigm in image management came around. And we saw our phones getting over-the-air updates. That was really, really intriguing because this wasn't a zero-touch push where you had to Pixie boot or wake on LAN or vPro your machine awake. Now you're just being able to update the operating system over the air. That was pretty darn cool. And in fact, there's a product that many of us probably know or have used today. There's the Internet System Recovery in OS X, where you can now literally boot in the EFI firmware of the device. You can actually go and pull down the operating system. That's pretty badass. And I look at all of those, and there's one more technique or technology that I think is really going to start to play in. And I'm not going to pitch any product that I'm just personally a fan of because it happens to belong to the company I work for. But centralized image management with peer-to-peer distribution. Because if you think about all of these OS deployments, if you think about what's at the other end of your wide area network, every one of these machines has the same copy of blocks on their hard drive. They're all running Windows 7. They all have 70–80% of the blocks are identical machine to machine. Isn't it silly that we still follow a patch deployment process where in August of 2012 it was about 120, 130 megabytes in 32 MSIs to patch on Patch Tuesday for August of 2012. So if you're deploying those, you literally were daisy chaining 32 MSI installers back to back to back and letting each one of those MSIs overwrite the DLL of the one before it. There's actually way more efficient ways if you start to look at peer-to-peer distribution of these types of blocks. And so if you follow the pattern, I think we've gone from how to manage this one at a time centrally. The next thing I think you're actually going to start to see is managing the collective of devices way more like what we're doing with phones today. Now the next area is how do we go about managing applications. One of my favorite slides is not one that tries to talk about the demise of Windows. This isn't the Windows logo in the casket that we saw in the morning keynote. But what I'm talking about is the long tail of Windows. And that is that Windows apps are going to be around a long, long time, right along with Twinkies and cockroaches. And OS neutral apps are certainly coming around. And a lot of people always ask what that middle blue color is, what do they call it? Browser-specific applications. I think because we're among friends here, we can just all admit that's IE6. Right? Those were the web apps that happen to use ActiveX controls or really creative HTML in order to claim them to be web apps. So if we're moving to this new world of more platform-independent applications in the enterprise, what we've gone from the native application when it ran in a terminal over to native local applications that just saved files locally to floppy disks, over to client server, to our friend the ActiveX control, and started to move more towards that web-based deployment. And then we fixed that. We quickly got out of the applet model and started to move more into things like Ajax to be able to deliver that. And it's even better now because you can get even funkier than Ajax when you start to bring in an HTML5 style of delivery. Hi, Dan Shapir, who will be watching this video at some point. And finally, even things like Facebook. Remember, Facebook was doing an iPhone app that was predominantly HTML5. In order to get a more native experience, they had to go back to more native code and throw away the HTML5 for right now. Now you're getting to where they're native client applications, but they're connecting to back-end web services. And that certainly seems like a much more modern way and sustainable way of supporting applications that everybody's trying to get into the game now of native applications being back-ended by web services. And yeah, just kidding. So everything is trying to move more to this model where you're getting the full native human interfaces all back-ended by a logic server that's back on the back end. So it's kind of this thick SaaS hybrid in the applications. Now, you bundle this all together, and how do you support the user in the OS and applications? You know, I got to hear for a few minutes right before folks walked in what it's like to do phone support of our mother who's having trouble using their Mac. I think hey, how's it going? So, helping people over the phone, doing things like PC Anywhere to do remote control. This is what we used to do: SneakerNet, login scripts, setting IT standards for how we're going to deploy it. And now we've moved into the concept of group policy, right? The new hotness. And deploying our applications using something like a SBC model or a hosted virtual desktop. And now we're even getting into the mobile application space. And an area that I'm specifically really interested in is around this whole data container idea. Because when you start to manage the OS and the apps in a different model, now we're starting to progress to where it's not the same old distributed complexity that we have today. So that takes us to this whole trend, and I enjoyed the session a little bit earlier that I attended just right before this one. It's all about the, right? I can't tell you how often I hear this one in IT presentations, right? Because we could say, yeah, it used to be all about managing the device, because that's what we were doing. We were truly managing all these devices. You think of any type of computer or electronic device that we use. Your cable box, your home set-top box, your satellite receiver, your Sirius radio, your cable modem, your DSL router. If you have a problem with any of these devices today, and you have to call up for support, what do they tell you to do? Reset it, right? My favorite one is, just the idea that you press and hold the reset button for 10 seconds. Or when I call my cable company for my cable modem, it's, turn it off, unplug it, wave the cable around your head for 30 seconds. I think the guy just gets his jollies, laughing at people doing all the crazy tricks he tells. and then you can power it back up. But there's only this one device that we have where you have to install the OS, do a malware scan, a registry repair, a system restore, a cleanup, and send the Geek Squad guy out in his Volkswagen in order to repair it. There's only one piece of consumer electronics that we deal with that kind of crap, and it's the PC. It's the only thing that has every single one of them is handcrafted to be this type of device. So it's not all about the device. We're going to be friendly, and it's all about the user. Because it's not about managing devices, it's about making sure that the users have just what they need to do. Well, that didn't quite fly, and I actually did have this before the afternoon session, because then people said it's all about the apps. And again, this was my interview question when I joined VMware, right? David, I'm so glad to hear your perspective because you get it. It's all about the applications. And I'm sitting there going, exactly, yeah, it's all about the application. I don't actually believe a word in this bullshit. And I'm, shaking my head. I'm like, I've never, this is just me. I don't believe it's all about the applications. For me, and it was even the question that was asked. Where's my friend that asked it? There he is. This was the question that got asked. He said, what about the content? Because there used to be a simpler time where file storage was just putting it on the file share, and sharing was putting it on the public share, and file sync was robocopy/mirror. And I told Dan Brinkman, now that he works for ShareFile, if anybody reads Dan Brinkman's articles or blogs, I told him I want to do a bake-off of ShareFile versus robocopy/mirror to compare how far we've come over the time. And collaboration meant attaching a file and dropping it in email or SharePoint. And data just wants to be free, because file storage, it's what's a file anymore? We were talking about this. Evernote. Evernote doesn't create files. The content is in the application. The content is now literally getting bundled so tightly that it's not something that you can just drop in the enterprise Dropbox and sync. Content is belonging to the applications, and many of the times it's not your application to manage. And file sharing. Yeah, I added you to the Dropbox share. File sync is the concept of enterprise Dropbox, and people are putting more and more emphasis now into the collaboration tools like SocialCast or Podio or Cisco Pulse. So follow this trend of where content lived, right? We used to have the world where / server shared, and that was where content lived. And we've made the transition. This is like what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get now to file sync, where you can use an enterprise repository in order to sync your data so that people have mobility of access. And I honestly think that this could be fruitless, because no sooner are we going to try to get our hands around this file-based world than you're going to have the things like Evernote, where the content is just part and parcel to the service or the application that you're consuming. And how you're going to protect your enterprise data when it's not even created in the enterprise. It's created with a camera. It's synced with Dropbox or Evernote. I honestly, I never ever used Evernote up until about 2 or 3 months ago, and it is insane how every thought that comes into my head, every interaction I have with a customer is now going straight into Evernote, and it never once touches enterprise IT. You are now going to be using consumer services to produce information and picking and choosing what you export to put into IT systems that try to control that data. It's no longer worried about data leakage. You're praying as IT people for data ingestion. Fair statement? You are just hoping that people choose to put data into the corporate enterprise repositories because they've got way more incentive not to. And how are we going to manage going into that space? Identity management, we understood this. We actually felt like we had a pretty good handle on okay, I did my Novell to NT migration and got a handle on domains and trusts. And we went through this painful exercise a decade ago of moving into an LDAP, like an Active Directory, to start to manage this in a more scalable fashion. But when I talk about these services like the Evernotes and like the WebExes of the world, what we're moving to isn't creating trusts, but rather we're really needing to learn more about identity federation. And I don't care what product you use. I don't care if it's Horizon, Cloud Gateway, Ping Identity, Okta, to name a few. Get to know SAML. Because SAML is the only chance that you're going to have of doing identity federation. And there is a chance that we might even see SAML getting flipped around backwards on us.
Can you give like 30 seconds, like what is SAML?
Yeah. Totally fair point, right? So if you think about all of the different web applications that we might use, WebEx, Salesforce.com, Workday, all these different SaaS apps, every one of them contained their own identity database. You created a username, you created a password, and as users, what do we now know about every one of those? They have different password complexity requirements that expire on different intervals and require you to go and invest in a password manager just so that you can try and keep them all in sync with one another because you've got all this going on. What SAML allows you to do is get rid of the concept of a username and password in each one of these silo repositories and federate your own identity system, your own authority, which for most today is Active Directory. And people get real freaked out. Wait a minute, my Active Directory, that I run on-prem, behind the corporate firewall. I'm not going to export my username and password hashes, right? That would be ludicrous that somebody could go and run loft crack against your AD and crack all your user passwords. SAML is the way around that. SAML doesn't expose any of your password or your credentials. Rather, what SAML does is it allows you to create effectively a public service that these systems can come back and say, hey, is this person that is coming and trying to access my service, are they authorized? And you provide what's called an assertion to say, yes, David is allowed to use it. The best example of this one from my life is when I joined VMware, I went to use WebEx. And I hosted a meeting, and at the end of the beginning of the meeting, the customer said, David, you're on Cisco's WebEx. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. You see, Cisco bought WebEx. They're like, no, you are on cisco.webex.com, and we're used to people being on vmware.webex.com. What gives? I'm like, don't know. Well, after the meeting, I went and looked. Well, it turns out my username and password was saved in my Outlook plugin for WebEx. I had been gone from the company for 6 weeks, but they never deactivated my WebEx account. So you can see where in a SAML model, that wouldn't have happened. I wouldn't have had an independent identity that needed to get deactivated. It's all stitched together to a common repository. So, I wish that this would have come out a little bit clearer, but this is the best example, 7 steps to understanding how a SAML transaction actually works.
Real quick, is there a Microsoft product, like out of the box, that I can use to take AD to make it SAML compatible, or is that all third-party stuff?
So there is a Microsoft product, Active Directory Federation Services, or ADFS. ADFS does provide SAML-based services. What the third parties, all the ones that I've already mentioned, what they do is they start to wrap more logic around just the federation element. Wouldn't it be nice to know who isn't even using WebEx? Why are you paying $20 a month for a guy that hasn't logged into WebEx in 6 months? Maybe his role has changed. These other third-party products help in provisioning an account on these third-party systems so that I can spin up very quickly a WebEx account for a new employee that says that they need it, and then after 30 days of inactivity, I will deprovision them. So it's really building around the core of SAML. SAML is an open industry standard. ADFS is what I consider a trivial implementation of SAML, and then all the third parties are building the enterprise app store and asset management frameworks around that. Certificates. Not telling anybody to go and become PKI masters or PKI wizards, but gone is the day of passwords. Static passwords are gone. You really want to understand concepts like what a PKI is, a public key infrastructure. Who knows what a CRL is? Go for it. A certificate revocation list, exactly. When to know a bad certificate is out there. What is a validation authority? What is a registration authority? This is going to sustain us a whole lot more. Now, I guarantee somebody right now is going, what a waste of air. We know this. Of course certificates are current. Let me tell you what happens when a vendor changes a product to require the use of a signed certificate. And watch the help desk phone calls light up with people going, how the hell do I turn this off? Because I just wanted to test the product out. I didn't want to have to learn anything at all about importing a certificate. It blew me away. I truly didn't think that we as a collective industry lacked this basic understanding of certificates. And it blew me away when we introduced a product that required that you have signed certificates, that this would create such churn that we had to go racing to allow, very simple step-by-step guides on how to create a self-signed certificate with appropriate caveats and change the clients to not require that it be tied to a recognized CA, et cetera. So make sure that this is something that you at least have, a 100 level of understanding in your tool belt. Object-based security, or also known as all your base are belong to us. It used to be a lot simpler when everything was just a set of file permissions that we could apply on a file. And it was even great when there was a GUI to set those exact same permissions so that we didn't have to be quite so nerdy. But just as SAML is to authentication, anybody seen this type of exchange when you're dealing with something like Twitter? Do you want to authorize TwitPic to access and post your tweets and update your profile, etc.? Just as important as SAML, just as important as certificates, is get to understand the basic 100 levels of OAuth. Because I truly believe that we may actually see things get inverted between corporate identities and personal identities, where we as enterprise people are going to actually have people bringing their own identity to us instead of us issuing a brand new identity. We may see a time where an individual's Gmail account or their Facebook account is what they choose to be their authoritative identity, and we need to start managing what exactly are they going to share with us, where we start actually interconnecting our systems so that it's not my work identity and my personal identity. I went to Jack Madden's enterprise mobility management session, and he talked a lot about dual persona. And maybe it's just me, but I'm not a toggle switch in my life, right? Right now, I'm up here talking about IT tech and trends and being very passionate about it. But if any one of you wanted to go off on a sidebar conversation right now about Christmas lights and synchronizing them to music, I would be all over that. Because I am just as much into synchronizing Christmas lights to music as I am my day job of IT. My point is this is not a toggle. We are dual persona concurrently. At the same time, we are both people and we are employees. And trying to create these nice, clean dividing lines of this is your corporate identity and this is your personal identity, and we shall keep those two completely exclusive to one another. What happens when, take Dropbox for example, right? Dropbox right now is making a massive push into the business, and they're introducing Dropbox for Business. Well, the first question that I had is, so what? Do I get 2 Dropbox icons down in my tray? That was the question I was wondering. I'm a Dropbox personal user. What would happen if all of a sudden my enterprise wanted me to be a Dropbox user as well? And how do you handle that? My brother is a great example. He's a bank president of a small community bank, but he is also on the board of trustees of a community college. The community college issues him content and assigns him permissions, and he has an identity from the college, but he also has one from his bank. Do you think he's going to need to carry one laptop for the bank and one laptop for the college for him to be able to access this? The only way that we're going to be able to really start to get to this dual persona in a way that makes sense for me is to figure out how we're going to be able to take this forward in a level of concurrency that we're not seeing yet today. And OAuth is truly the way that you start to see who is authoritative for what objects and how do those get stitched together. What identity are you actually granting those permissions to? Programming languages. This was one where I saw an article and I just said, wow, I got to throw that one out. It was a scathing article about the prospects of being a software developer as we get older. And the basic theme, and I pasted this whole thing in just because the guy, at face value, the guy appears to be pretty well recognized in terms of his credentials. So I had to paste that in just to see, like, this is all one guy, right? He's a fellow, an author, and writes for Bloomberg Businessweek. So I went through this huge article, and I kind of, picked out just 3 points. His statement was, if you're turning 55 years old and you're a programmer, what enterprise is going to be wanting to pay you twice as much because of your decades of experience, maybe 3 times as much as what they could get a brand new hire out of college for? What exactly in the world of software development, if that's all you do is write code, how are you going to maintain your relevance and be able to sustain a career over that time? Basically, his comment is that age is against you. And it is such a reinvented skill that it's just too easy to shift off to someone that costs less. His recommendations: diversify your skill set. Look to ways to get into architecture or management or design on the systems. Get very deep line of business expertise. If the only thing that you know how to do is put a semicolon at the end of your code, that's not going to serve you very well. Get to really understand the business rules and the business logic that you're instrumenting so that you're more relevant to the business, and just stay as current as you can. In today's world of Ruby on Rails, we're already moving past the LAMP stacks that we were talking about just 5 years ago, right? The LAMP stack of Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP are now getting supplanted with these new things like Spring frameworks and Grails. So, real quick, just a couple closing comments as far as people that have been successful in navigating all of these changes and how they've managed to stay current. I captured from the survey responses, I asked everybody the same question: what advice will you give my audience on what they need to do to stay current? And so I just wanted to give you kind of a cross-section of what people had to share with the group. This is Scott Shipley. Scott worked for one of the largest resellers in the United States, Forsyth Consulting. Scott was one of the key Citrix engineers on the product, on the team. Did a lot of engagements all over the United States. And this guy went from being deployed to sit on the floor in the data center of Blue Cross Blue Shield and doing app packaging to sitting in a corner office managing the entire global enterprise for a medical products manufacturer. And it's just absolutely astonishing to me to see a guy that I knew as just a really great technical guy leading a team of about 150 people now reporting to him. And just a couple things that Scott said, right? IT is ever changing, so embrace the fact that it's going to be ever changing. Okay, I can get that one. I love the second one, which is, as you progress in your career, he loves to keep his hands dirty. So Scott is one of the greatest executives I know, because he isn't a leader just because of his title or because of his lines of reporting. This guy is like a player coach. He gets in with his team and is just as willing to try and solve the problem as he is, tell the guy that he needs to cancel his plans for the evening because he has to stay late for the upgrade. And he brings up the mentor aspect. This mentor thing, I agree with it, but mentoring needs to be done right. Sheryl Sandberg from Facebook just mentioned this in her book. And the whole concept of a mentor, don't any of you go up to somebody and say, hey, Bill Gates, I'd like you to be my mentor. This isn't flattering at all. Mentoring is something that you really need to develop into through mutual respect, not just something that you cold call on an exec and ask them to be a mentor. Make sure that it's really someone that's helping you navigate. Next is Oliver Parvin. Oliver was, in my opinion, he was a pioneer of bring your own device in the industry. He was one of my colleagues in Cisco IT. This guy went from the Active Directory migration from NT4 to 2000, where he sat on a row of tables where he called users and asked them to please accept the Active Directory migration script that was getting pushed down to his computer. That was when I met him. And now he is in charge of the Any Device program for Cisco IT. And effectively, this whole consumerization thing is one of the things that Ali called out for us, is follow the technologies that you would use when you're not working, because the chances are if it's interesting to you, it's probably interesting to others as well. So, and for good reason. Just stay passionate, stay engaged, and don't allow this to become a work life versus personal life thing. Start to understand this whole integration of the two. Brandy Schmidt. Brandy is a graphics designer by trade. Went to school to learn how to do graphics arts, and she worked on the US Army of One campaign, literally designing that ad campaign and the collateral that went into it. Brandy has since gone on to become a Documentum administrator and is in the process of virtualizing loads of physical Documentum servers over to Linux and putting them into a virtual infrastructure at Dow Corning. And so hers are pretty simple. Just stay abreast of what's out there. She went from a completely non-related career to one where she's been absolutely phenomenal in being able to go from a graphics designer to deploying virtualized infrastructure. And just the comment, you never know when you may need to use it. Information is flying by us at such a rapid pace. And then the last one of our own, I guess, friends from the community, Dan Brinkman, expert blogger, VMware vExpert. He's now with Citrix ShareFile. Here's Dan's, which are just super pragmatic, and that's what I like about it. This isn't an 8-to-5 job. Troubleshooting and being able to articulate problems back to a business leader in terms that they can understand are key. Have a home lab and try not to get religious about this, because I was just, it wasn't long ago, I'm reading articles about, here's how to fight for your vendor. Here's how to make sure that your product or your bias comes out on top when you're in these types of things. Just not a very sound basis to get. You don't want to let your career get completely wrapped up into one vendor's technology or one vendor's vision for what the future is. So just a few quick closing comments from folks that participated to provide a lot of the data and the details that were in this presentation. So with that, I'll take the last 5 minutes that we have. Anybody have any questions about content or things that we discussed? Complete with microphone. We got about 8 feet. I hope your voice carries.
So you're talking about OAuth and using home, essentially, services to authenticate your corporate resources. But ultimately, it'll always come down to the lowest common denominator across all platforms. So in corporate IT, you have to have a security policy, for example, change your password every X days. On your Google account, when's the last time you were forced to change your password? So either all that stuff will come into home services and people stop using them, or there needs to be a middle ground where our standards need to drop to match them. So What's your?
Oh, it's a phenomenal question, right? So effectively the lowest common denominator question, and I think it's a super valid question. My quick and you might even sound like a cop-out response is the lowest common denominator exists today with all the services that people have available to them. So if you have at all an unreasonable password policy, when I say unreasonable, right? Less than 30 days, you have to change your password, or cannot be one of the last 12 that you've used. Chances are you've already dug yourself a hole so deep that there's no way that someone is living by your policies in a meaningful way. They're not respecting it. They're writing them down. They're using clear text password, management like Notepad. They're already doing that today. So federating out and allowing this is one where potentially the only things that you would extend, if we were to take the SAML or an OAuth example, maybe it would only be systems that are non-content repositories. A great one would be like WebEx. Maybe I allow WebEx to follow whatever lowest common denominator is out there, and I still retain higher levels. Maybe I simply enforce two-factor so that becomes one of two factors in order to access something of higher security importance. So I think that there's still ways that we can stack and prioritize, even if we start to relinquish control of things that traditionally would have been enterprise-centric. It's not something that will happen overnight, but that's just, it's one of those things that I truly feel like the trend is upon us, and that it never hurts to actually anticipate these things before they become a real problem for us.
Is there a way to, I don't know if this is a real question, is there a way to like OAuthify existing, let's say you got existing enterprise apps that are using AD, kind of using internally. Can you sort of wrap those in some way that makes them more like OAuth based, or you have to go back to the app maker and have them kind of rewrite?
I think it's a phenomenal question. So OAuth is typically implemented at an API level to an application. So you need to build an object-oriented system. Now, I'm not personally aware, please anybody throw out, if you know an OAuth rectifier or an OAuth retrofitter, some way that you can go and OAuth into a legacy environment. The only way I can maybe see some of that working is if you start to get into more brokering and gateway technologies. So in an enterprise Dropbox example, you could have a CIFS file share. CIFS is certainly not today an OAuth capable system, but if you're coming in through an enterprise proxy to your CIFS file share, that could certainly instrument OAuth as a front-end gateway. Last question, 1 minute remaining. Go for it.
More of a comment.
Please.
A lot of this led to some of your comments about there's a big lack of leadership in IT today. I mean, sure, all of us work for many managers and directors and C-levels, and our industry has been technical prowess, right, has gotten you into those higher levels, but a lot of people don't have management skills that are in this level. So along with staying current on IT and technology and being hands-on and having your own lab and stuff like that,
Right.
Kind of step out of the box and read some leadership material and gain some leadership skills as well.
Oh, that's a phenomenal one, and that really, immediately when you're saying this, I think very quickly of Scott Shipley, who's running Biomet today, because that's exactly what he did from a leadership angle. Well, another one of those, and please, before anybody leaves, remember, centralize complexity, distribute simplicity. The other career quote that I will never forget is, I wanted to become a manager, so I went to my manager and said, hey, I'm looking for how to get into a leadership position. Can you maybe tell me how to go about doing that? And he said, well, you're already in one. And I'm like, well, no, I checked the directory and I don't have any reports. He's like, well, he said, you're misunderstanding leadership. He said, from his perspective, and because it was how he rose to where he was, he said, leadership is when you turn around and you realize that all the smart people are following you. Leadership isn't just reflected in an organizational chart and because you have hire, fire, and salary review authority. And if you're truly trying to elevate your career into a leadership position, I guess that would be the other piece I would complement to what you're saying, is please don't get caught up on direct reports. this is something where leaders are the ones that the smart people are following. And you've earned the respect, and people are coming to you because you know how to help them solve the problems and move forward. So with that, thank you guys very, very much for coming to the session. Really means a lot to see this many show up, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.